Welcome to Revitalize and Replant. My name is Thom Rainer. I am joined by Kevin Ezell, the president of the North American Mission Board. Hey, Kevin, always
Hey.
good to have you, my friend.
Hey, always great to be with you, man. I love to bat things around with you, brother.
Yeah, we talk, we banter, we talk offline, we talk online, and it's always fun. This particular podcast, as always, is brought to you by Revitalize and Replant, sponsored by the North American Mission Board and churchreplanters.com. And if you have never heard us say this, you need to hear it again. More than 10% of churches in North America are at risk of closing. The North American Mission Board is committed to reversing this trend by decreasing the death of existing churches and increasing the birth rate of new churches. If you want to find out more about them, go to churchreplanters.com. Or if you want to find out more about the North American Mission Board, go to NAMB.net. You can see all that in the show notes. Kevin and I today are going to talk about an issue that comes up frequently. I'm sure it does at North American Mission Board. It certainly does at Church Answers. And it's the issue of the low commitment church. And when you say a low commitment church, basically you're talking about low commitment church members and church leaders. We're going to be talking about that over 3 parts. This first part is somewhat of a background, but I hope it'll be helpful. How low commitment churches got the way that they got there. In other words, why are they low commitment? Kevin, here's some things we're hearing, and you can let us know what you're hearing. We're hearing from more and more churches that the problem of low commitment has been exacerbated as a result of the pandemic, and people who were 2 and 3 times a month attenders are now once a month, and people who were once a month are not coming at all, and some who are coming are not as committed and volunteering as they used to be. That's some of the information we're hearing. How about on your end as well?
No, that's exactly the case, and a lot of people are just not coming at all. That
Yes.
So-called were. And it's kind of giving them an excuse to be who they really were. I guess
Yes.
I think it's exposed more than it's changed people. So
that's a good point. It's the people have not changed. You're just seeing who they really are. Pandemic, it gave them an excuse not to show up, and so they continue to go that direction.
Yeah, and sadly enough, and again, this may be a little more anecdotal, but I think a lot of people, they come for the fellowship, the connectivity, and you take the if you're not going to let them come and really connect and have the fellowship that they normally have done, they just don't see the need to come. But we've seen that, and it seems to be escalating a bit, quite honestly, with a second kind of a wave. It seems to have even a harder impact.
Yeah, it seems like the Delta variant that second wave did more than the original pandemic. It was like we're going to hang in there with the original pandemic. Delta comes along, and all I can think of is a Helen Reddy song, Delta Dawn. What's that?
What's that flower you got on?
Could it be a faded rose from days gone by? Anyway, it seems like it's exacerbated that.
But you know what's crazy? Does it seem like you watch football on Saturday, people are jammed in there,
Yes.
So it's not like they're not going to everything. It's just that somehow church has become, obviously less of a priority, and it's hard to figure. I haven't really cracked the code on it.
Hey, I'm going to go down just a side street for just a moment. We'll come back to the main street. We're recording this in actually early November, but our listeners and our viewers on YouTube won't see it to early February. So we're here. You and I. You're a pretty big college football fan.
Oh, big, yeah. Mm.
Georgia.
Oh, heavens no. Kentucky, but
Kentucky.
Football's the appetizer till basketball starts in Kentucky.
Okay. So I'm going to antagonize some of my Alabama fans right now, but I think this is Georgia's year. I do not think Alabama is going to beat Georgia, and I'm even worried because Alabama's playing at Auburn that we'll lose the Iron Bowl as well. Yeah. We have a tendency to do that.
Man, you're really going out on a limb.
If that is the case, that is a 3-loss team, which will be the first 3-loss team that Saban has had since his first year there 16 years ago. So that's my prediction, and I'm going to keep it there. And when this goes live, or when it's released in February, I'm willing to take whatever comes my way.
So what you're saying is Alabama's going to be a 3-loss team. They're going to fire Saban.
Yeah.
And he goes back to LSU and sets up another dynasty, right?
Oh gosh, yeah. And he just turned 70 years old, so I doubt that's the case. All right, I'm gonna bring us back to this road. You had said something about sports, and that just triggered that comment. Sports day. Yeah, people are packing in. I can guarantee you, I've been to one Alabama game. Nobody there is worried about getting any type of COVID.
Yeah, no.
So let's do a little bit of background on this. Why are churches low commitment? Some of this, and this does have some research attached to it, and it's really not that interesting, but I still want to put it up there. Some of this is because churches are imitating more organizations that are not churches. And they're looking at those organizations, and those organizations primarily give them something if they pay something. A country club or even a civic club where you may have some type of responsibility, you get things, an HOA. Oh, I hate HOAs. All of those things are you pay something and you get a benefit. Many church members will say, well, let me tell you, I am a contributor to the church, therefore you should do the following. And we follow the pattern of culture with some of our members.
No, I think you're exactly right, and somewhat, their level of expectation of production and what actually goes on has gone up. And I don't know. Again, I don't know if it's because people got online, they saw a lot of different variations of how worship is done and things, and so they become displeased with a subpar presentation. You hate to say it that way, but
it kind of started when they plopped in the cassettes of Adrian Rogers back then. I heard the cassette of Adrian. Let me tell you, you're no Adrian. Yeah, exactly. Or whomever. And then along came the podcast for points of comparison. And now, oh my gosh, you got streaming services.
Yeah, we got people. My mom is right at 80. My word, she watches 5 services on Sunday. She didn't used to watch 5. She's just bored, and I just think it's got easy access for people to look at other options. So,
well, a second reason here is a failure to establish expectations. This can be rhetorical, or you can answer whichever way you want to go. But do you see many churches that clearly establish this is what we expect of our members early on?
Well, I mean, it seems like our plants are doing that, but not
new churches are, yeah.
But existing churches, no, they're just grateful that they're there, and that's a problem. You don't have people taking leadership roles, or really no expectation of no onboarding process. I've been surprised. I mean, churches don't have any type of new member orientation or any process at all. It basically walk the aisle, fill the card, and you're in.
You're done. One of the things we also found out, Kevin, in our research is your first statement is correct. The vast majority of churches do not have an entry point to establish expectations. And you remember class 101 class, whatever you call it. But also when we dug one layer more deeply, most of those entry points were about information and not expectation. Here's what we believe. Here's who we are. Here's our staff. But never, here's what you do as a part of this church.
Yeah, they're scared to talk about giving. They're scared to talk about leadership, or we even had, we had behavior. We explained church discipline and the fact that we actually did it, and that it really is. I mean, basically a pulse is what's expected of most.
Yeah, for most churches, there are a few dead people on the rolls, but yeah, for most churches. The most common way to establish expectations, and we'll get into this in our next episode, because we're doing a 3-part series. And let me just remind you, viewers and you listeners, Kevin Ezell and I are doing a 3-part series on leading a low commitment church to becoming a high commitment church. And in this first episode, we're giving you some background information, how the low commitment churches got that way. So when we talk about failing,
and no one's more qualified to talk on low committed anything than you or me, right? You think?
That's true. That's true. Uh, New member class, we'll talk about in the next episode, but that entry point is critical. Churches that have that. Kevin, I wrote about the new member class, and I believe the year was 1997 in a book called High Expectation Churches.
Mm-hmm.
I got blasted for
Mm-hmm.
that. I mean, people were saying, "Oh, you can't have expectations of members. We're saved by grace. We're members by grace."
Right.
But
What? Yeah, and then you have some people who have no common sense on how to implement it. And I don't know if we talk about that later, but they're like, okay, you're right. We need to have high expectations. We're going to do it. There was a guy who just recently graduated seminary, went to his church, and he made every member go back through some type of onboarding, and he got him fired. He was there for 6 months, and they canned him. You know, it's like, man, you got to use some good common sense here and grandfather in the 80-year-olds. You know, I mean, you don't have them go back through.
Well, I love what this is what Sam Rayner does in Bradenton. He has required new member classes for entry, but he always asks 2 current members, usually longer term, to host the new member class with him.
That's a great idea.
So they're sitting there and, hey, welcome these people who are coming in there, get to know them. Hey, if you have any ideas how I can improve, this class, let us know. And he has a class about every 2 months. And so, 12 to 15 people a month. Slowly, he's been there 6 years, 6 plus. He's beginning to get people in there.
Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic. That's a great idea. Yeah.
I never thought about that. I actually joined his church. I have dual membership. I think that's supposedly ecclesiologically and polity wrong, but I have, because I'm in Florida and I'm in Tennessee, I have dual membership with the 2 Rayner churches. And so I sat through that new member class, and sure enough, and that particular one is only one lay person who was in there, but he was head of personnel and never been through a membership class. Pretty cool.
That is.
Sam says, evaluate me.
Yeah.
Okay. This particular point is number 3. When numbers mean too much, I usually go to the other side where, and you and I have talked about this, where churches don't count. They're so anti-number that they don't have accountability. Mm-hmm. But in talking about the background of how we got this way, 2 things took place, Kevin. One was we looked at total membership, but we didn't have any type of expectation about our membership of 800 people when we have an attendance of 150. So we had that big gap. And then the other one is many times, and again, I don't want to be the anti-numbers guy, but many times those numbers were a goal that did not have any discipleship behind them. So, I told you at the onset offline, if give me whatever perspective you want on this. It doesn't have to be Thom Rayner's perspectives for sure.
No, I totally agree. Sometimes, I like to use that passage in Acts 13 where the Church of Antioch sent them off, and I really think one of the metrics of a healthy church is they're multiplying and they're sending people off. When you do that, your numbers go down. So you have to have a proper understanding of numbers. That could be an excuse when they're going down, but that's a healthy way to multiply. So again, what I'm saying is I think ultimately churches won't be, I don't think they're going to be really, in a sense, if you say churches are judged by their seating capacity, but more their sending capacity. But that's not the problem. These low performing churches,
yes,
they just don't have an outward focus enough, and they just focus on themselves, and it just evaporates.
And then talk about for a moment, let's look at the largest Protestant denomination, Southern Baptist Convention, roughly 14.8, 15 million. And then on a given Sunday, 6.5 million show up. That's a big gap as well.
Oh heavens. And again, a lot of it is because, my preference is we just clean it up and say, if we had any type of expectation at all, then you just clean the rolls up. You could easily clean it. I suggested this and it didn't go anywhere, but if a church hasn't baptized anyone in 2 years and they haven't given $1 or say even a cent to missions.
Yes.
Which is why we exist as a Southern Baptist Convention. It's around missions. Then you eliminate them or put them on probation, or, that would take the 47,000 church number even itself down. So we've kind of taught, don't rock the boat, just leave people on the roll, don't expect too much. And I just think, I think there's a lot to be said with people who, the more I expected of church members, the more they produced. If you start from the very beginning,
exactly.
If you just show up, we'd sure appreciate it, and show up occasionally. We're just grateful you're here. And I remember when we started saying our leaders in our church, we would check their giving.
Yes.
And that was a big deal.
Oh, yeah.
You check their giving. Well, of course we would. If they're going to steal from God, they'll steal from us. And so that's
I've told this story on more than one occasion, so some of the listeners and viewers will have heard it before. But in a church where I was, the head of the finance committee had never given. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know giving. And finally, the financial secretary, who was not a member of the church, came mm-hmm. to me and said, I know you're not supposed to know these things, but I'm about to tell you something.
Yeah.
And I dealt with it. And boy, did I get a lot of pushback. I mean, it was terrible because I dealt with the issue that the guy who had the most say in what was happening with the funds of the church had never given to the church before.
Yeah.
It's an extreme example, but it's a true example.
Well, it goes back to what you said, we're saved by grace. Everything's used to be by, which we are. But I remember back when I went to Hy-Vee, my very first year, and I started a staff evaluation. These people you pay to work there. And a staff evaluation every 6 months. And you would have thought I was trying to add or delete a book of the Bible,
Wow.
Because you're trying to make this like a corporation or, and like, nope, just having some basic expectations.
Golly.
I still remember one guy, Thom. I said, oh gosh, I swear. When I was confronting him about him coming in late, he'd come in like at 9:30 and leave at 3. And I said, look, that's just not going to work here. We have, earlier hours than that. And he goes, well, that's just the discipline I've not learned yet. And I'm like, you're 45. You should be a little farther along than that.
Wow, the discipline of waking up and getting out of bed.
Yeah.
Another reason, and we're talking about leading a low commitment church and become a high commitment church. This first episode of 3 is how low commitment churches got the way they did. Some of them got away from biblical preaching. Most pastors are preaching the Bible. So but if you get away from true biblical preaching, and I'm not necessarily going into expository or narrative or topical, I'm just saying some of them got away from biblical preaching. If you do that, you become a low expectation church.
Yeah. And, I really think I probably, you're exactly right. Nobody would ever say that. They would never say. They use the Bible every time they preach, and so they don't get away from biblical. But I think they're guilty of being selective preaching.
Yes, that's better.
They never tackle the hard issues. They only go to the touchy-feely. I mean, it's just like that guy in Houston, that everybody's happy. I forgot his name. But I always make fun of him because every sermon is just mush. It's just all. It's a big cheerleading session, but they don't cover any of the difficult topics. That's why it is helpful to go through books because you're forced to deal with certain topics.
Yeah, and I don't know if you know this. I went through the book of Acts one time.
Yeah.
The reason Kevin and I said that, I was the interim preacher before Kevin became the pastor. He had to clean up all the stuff I messed up, but I went through the book of Acts right before.
No, people reminded me that constantly. Trust me. Yeah, but that's all right. When you go through a book like that, you're forced to deal with certain things you normally would just, it's too hard. We're going to go somewhere. And I love hearing pastors saying, oh, man, I'm going through this book, and this is a tough chapter this week. I really got to study, double hard. I'm like, man, that's exactly how it should be. Your people deserve that. Yeah. And it's like when people say, well, I've not heard a sermon on giving. I've not heard a sermon on, or you think about, it's an old term, calling out the called. Part of our problem now, we don't have enough planners. Part of international mission boards don't have enough missionaries. Why? Because we've really forgotten to remind people of the opportunity to
the local church responsibility, not the mission board responsibility.
Yeah, we've got the process ready. We just need people to go in the process. But I think it's selective preaching. It's just tell a good story, and give a good illustration, and head to lunch.
Well, if you preach through the book of Acts, it ain't going to take you long to get to Ananias and Sapphira. And there's all kind of giving, discipleship, lying, deceit. Oh man, you can go down the list on that one. So,
oh man, no, there's some. I love. That's why and that's why I love. Acts 20 is one of my favorite passages where Paul says, "Man, I consider my life worth nothing to me, but that I might complete the task." The whole book. That's really what the North American Mission Board is all about. It's the book of Acts. We're just trying to multiply churches, but you're exactly right. And it also shows the dysfunction of some. I mean, Antioch was a healthy church because it looked outward, but again, exposing your church to preaching we used to say the whole counsel, but not selectively preaching.
I like that phrase. Selective preaching has likely contributed to low expectation. I really like that. Finally, failure to define and make disciples. We say that we're all about making disciples, and I'll ask a leader, well, how do you know if you made a disciple in your church? What does that look like? Now, you may not get it perfect. You may not get all the characteristics that you want for a disciple, but if you don't know what a disciple looks like, you don't have a process for making that disciple.
All right. Yes. We have a thing around here we call Who's Your One, by who you're going to actually reach or pray for or witness to. But you could actually use the same thing. Who is the person that you've discipled in the last year or 2 years? And ask people just to make their list. And because sometimes they think a disciple is, having some kind of fellowship at their house after church on Sunday and not really investing in guys. And what's amazing about discipleship? I don't want to get on it too long. I was in Nashville preaching at the Bledsoe Association, and there's this guy out there. His name's Jimmy Crabtree. And I'm like, Crabtree, man, it's great. I was his pastor at First Baptist Hartsville like 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And I'm like, man, what are you doing here? That's so kind of you to come hear me preach. And I was thinking he came to hear me preach. I'm like, man, I'm just honored you do that. And he goes, man, I'm glad you're here too, but I didn't come to hear you preach. He said, I'm pastor in this association. I'm like, oh my gosh. and I just spent a little time with him, but the pastor who followed me spent a lot of time with him and discipled him. And it was just neat to see, the guy you'd never expect. Discipleship is so critical, and at least every pastor should do it. But you're right. It's definitely
undefined at times. And if it's undefined or ill-defined, it does not happen. And when we get to the next episode, we're going to talk about leading leaders to higher commitment, some of the things that leaders can do. So we'll be talking about that. In the third episode, we're going to talk about leading members to higher commitment. So 5 issues in the background. This is not an exhaustive list. Why are churches low commitment today? They're imitating culture much of the time. Secondly, they're not establishing expectations. Thirdly, they may be looking at numbers the wrong way. Again, I'm careful with that because I usually go the other way. Fourth, getting away from biblical preaching. I love what Kevin says. They're doing too much selective preaching. And then fifth, failure to define and make disciples. So this is our foundational podcast. We're going to have 2 more. We're going to look at the leaders and we're going to look at the members. As always, Kevin, great to be with you. And when you and I do recordings, we often do them back to back to back. So from my perspective, I'll see you just as soon as we get to the next recording. But from the viewers and listeners' perspective, I'll see you next week then.
All right. And they want to listen because in the next episode, we're going to name ineffective churches by name.
By name. Yes, we've got a list ready to go. So come back and we'll see you on the next episode of Revitalize and Repent, where we are helping churches get healthier together.